This is Jeff Yan. He is the co-founder of Hyperliquid, which has been doing 10 billion in daily volume. He went from being a quant at Hudson River Trading to running one of the largest decentralized exchanges in crypto. Here's what you need to know. I'm Minir, also known as Ghostwalk Trades on Twitter, and I also run an agency called Unbiased Trading where we can backtest and automate your trading systems. Now, for some context, after graduating from Harvard with degrees in computer science and maths, Jeff started his career at Hudson River Trading, one of the biggest market makers in the world. In 2018, he left HRT after becoming fascinated by Ethereum's smart contract.
My story probably sounds pretty similar for a lot of HFT folks out there. I graduated from Harvard, studied computer science and math, went straight to Hudson River Trading, which is one of the bigger market makers in TradFi. I worked on US equities, really had a great time there. It was the perfect environment. When I joined, it was about 150 people. I know now it's a lot bigger. Can't say enough positive things. Learned so much, got to work on the most interesting problems, perfect mix of engineering and math. This is like paradise for a quant. But 2018 came along, and with it, the crypto mania of building smart contracts on Ethereum. Read the yellow paper, and it just clicked, and I knew that this was going to be the future. And so I left to build sort of an L2.
After attempting to build an L2 exchange protocol in San Francisco, Jeff returned to trading, this time in crypto. What started as a side project quickly scaled into one of the largest market-making operations in crypto, capitalizing on all the market inefficiencies in crypto.
Traveled and ultimately decided I want to go back into trading because the day-to-day was a lot more interesting than struggling to find product market fit. So contemplating going back into the industry, joining some company, but thought maybe I would, since I knew all this about crypto from building, I would try to trade crypto first. And so started as a bit of a side project, but quickly saw the opportunity there and scaled it up really way faster than I thought was possible. I was surprised by how inefficient the markets were. So been heads down building that for maybe at this point almost 3 years. Really seriously started early 2020, which was great timing. Kind of got to grow with the market. So as the market 10x, even like 100x in volume, we kind of grew with it. Ultimately, our market share ended up being one of the biggest centralized exchange market makers. And about a year ago, we started looking at DeFi trading, and sort of really reminiscent of when we started centralized exchange trading, and that there were a ton of inefficiencies. But in this case, the protocols themselves were quite poorly designed. And we also saw this demand for a truly decentralized product after the whole FTX thing. People were finally catching on to the not your keys, not your coins, counterparty risk, that kind of stuff. Basically, it clicked for us that this was now the right time to build a decentralized exchange.
But what about some actual lessons from Jeff Yan? Well, number one is play in inefficient markets. Coming from equities at Hudson River Trading, Jeff was completely shocked by the inefficiencies in crypto. His first strategy, a basic market making Python script. The markets were so inefficient that he claimed you could write a simple Python code and potentially retire.
You told me you tried retiring and traveling the world. When was that?
This was around when I started looking at crypto markets. So basically it was like the markets are like surprisingly inefficient. So it was pretty easy. You could probably just like write some Python scripts and then retire back then. That's how inefficient it was. And so I basically did that and then was pretty bored. I think I'm also like really bad at traveling. So I think some people know how to enjoy traveling. But for me, it's very stressful. Like you need to kind of like go to this new place and figure out what to do and kind of like sleeping in somewhere unfamiliar, like eating unfamiliar foods. It's like not that enjoyable. And then
Very inefficient if you think about it, because everything is new all the time, right?
While this is a really simple lesson in wording, I think it actually holds a lot of weight for the main reason being that if you are just looking for inefficiencies, normally playing newer markets, especially something like crypto or even newer markets from there, like Indian markets, for example, can hold a lot of inefficiencies, but that doesn't come without some cons. Normally what I'll say is anytime you're playing in inefficient markets, you'll have other variable risk. So in crypto, a really obvious one is broker risk. If you had been with FTX, it doesn't matter if you had an amazing strategy making a ton of money, your money could be all tied up now, and only potentially now, after about a year or two, you're maybe getting some of that money back from their liquidations. And then there's countless other areas that can cause issues in crypto. You could send to the wrong address, you could have API issues, etc., which could then cause you to have a lot of variable risk, even if your strategy itself is super sound. Whereas in other markets that are more efficient, let's say equities and futures, you're going to have a lot of a harder time finding, as big of edges or inefficiencies at all. But the actual infrastructure you have there is really well built out. And for the most part, you're quite safe in most of these brokerages, for example, especially in futures and equities. Overall, it is definitely effective to play in inefficient markets. You just have to be conscious of that variable risk. For example, I'm currently deploying some crypto models as well, but anything with sizing on that side of things, I'm also taking into account that catastrophic error or variable risk as well. Compared to with the futures, if I put 6 figures on my futures models, I don't really have to account for that much of a worry about a broker shutting down and me losing all that money through there. A lot of these brokers have been around for decades and are incredibly solvent. So that isn't a top of one risk or top two risk even for me at all. Now, for number 2 is the importance of infrastructure. Jeff learned that infrastructure issues will kill your strategy faster than most modeling weaknesses. Your P&L is a product. Focus on your weakest component first.
So I'm just going to make cool machine learning models and find signals and generate alpha. That's what matters because that's the hardest thing to do. And I think that kind of attitude maybe works at a big company because people are so specialized. But if you're trying to run HFT on your own, then you're not going to get anywhere. That attitude. So the sort of dirty work that you're mentioning, understanding the APIs well, seeing what's missing in the documentation, measuring latencies, this kind of stuff is super important. My mental model for high frequency trading is, or really just like things in life, is that it's like a product of many numbers. So as a quant, I still want to be quantitative about it. It's not additive. Your efforts into different bins are additive in those bins. You might make your model a little bit better. Maybe you spend 10x the time and make 10x the delta there. But at the end of the day, it's the product. So it's like infrastructure times model, for example. As a concrete example, if your infrastructure is at 1 and your modeling is at 10, then where are you going to spend your unit of work? Obviously, you can mathematically see you should always work on the thing that is smallest. And the tough thing with HFT is it's kind of hard to know what these things are in the formula for that you're multiplying together.
Personally, I love this take. I definitely think I'm going to try and remind myself of this as well, that your P&L obviously comes from many different components, and each one of those components you need to level up for the most part. As you mentioned, if you had a crazy good model, but your infrastructure was very weak, you should be working on improving that infrastructure because then you'll be able to push more size through that model. If you have very bad infrastructure, you're not going to be able to do that. And I will say this is one place that, especially with recently deploying some models, crypto is got a really good API and just development structure for the most part. It's very nice to use. They've got amazing, powerful tools compared to equities and futures. While they're quite robust, the level of detail or powerness you could really do with any of them is a lot more lackluster with crypto. One of the easiest things is they have in crypto, you can use a Python library that can pretty much connect to any brokerage just using that library. Compared to in equities, normally you have to set up a whole different kind of connection for each different brokerage, for example. So those sort of things are really big positives, at least in crypto for development side of things. 3. His advice for starting in crypto HFT. Now, number 1, probably focusing on market making on Binance, or pick a long tail exchange and master its quirks. Avoid the middle exchanges where you'll have less volume, but you'll actually have very similar competition to if you were just market making, for example, on Binance.
You are keen on starting out in high frequency trading in crypto. You've recommended that they either just go make markets on Binance and focus on alpha generation, which I sort of interpreted as taking, not making, or picking some long tail exchange and trying to figure out the infrastructure quirks around that long tail exchange. And that's a good source of edge. Can you elaborate on why you think these are the 2 best avenues and how the approaches differ?
It's a bit like the bell curve meme, and you just don't want to be that guy in the middle. In this case, if you view the bell curve as the exchanges, then the big problem is the middle exchanges, maybe say rank 2 through 7 or something. You have a lot less volume than Binance, but about the same level of competitiveness and toxic flow. And the flow can be worse than Binance because at least Binance, as we know, the reason their volume is so high is that they have complete stranglehold over retail volume. I don't know how they do it, but they do. That's just the numbers speak for themselves. And so you don't get that padding, that nice mix of toxic and retail flow. The big HFT firms have all onboarded the top, I don't know how many, let's say top 15, they've definitely onboarded. And so they're going to be trading full capacity taker strategies, and you're not going to get much juice there. So if you're willing to like challenge yourself to do that, super scalable, large centralized exchange trading strategies, then just start with Binance and it will generalize as well as it does.
But what does he mean by toxic flows? Well, in HFT, toxic flow equals informed traders who know more than you. Jeff saw crypto evolve from mainly retail flow to increasingly sophisticated players trying to pick off market makers. This requires constant strategy adaptation.
Define what toxic flow is for people who've never heard that phrase before.
It's basically informed flow. So a mental model for how I saw crypto grow up was when I came in, it was already a little bit late. So I can only imagine projecting back in time what it looked like. But even when I came in, it was quite a lot of retail and there were big players playing, but the balance was still that there was not enough liquidity for what retail was demanding. And so retail flow is like what you want to target. The super obvious things are just like you just write generic maker strategies that post liquidity. Like we talked about earlier with making versus taking. If retail comes in and trades against your making orders, you're going to keep most of that spread that they crossed. You just do that and it makes money. And so that's a strong sign that the flow is by and large retail. But over time, you see like people notice this, they put up their maker strategies. And then when there's more liquidity from the makers, it suddenly makes sense for people to run taker strategies. And spreads get smaller as people compete to capture this really good retail flow. And then the takers suddenly come in and start picking off bad maker orders. This is just how markets evolve. There's a lot of value that the takers provide as well.
Now, to end off, a fascinating insight from Jeff was his HFT P&L was negatively correlated with returns in crypto, but there was a catch.
Whether it's maker or taker, it doesn't actually matter, is negatively correlated with returns in crypto. And this effect is like pretty strong, but if you zoom in on like actually trying to capture, so we were like super excited when we saw this, by the way. We were like, holy shit, let's just pivot. We'll just run HFT at a loss. We'll just trade mid-frequency. Like things are going to be great. It was a very strong effect. I don't remember the exact numbers, but like tens of basis points, like maybe an hour, 2-hour horizon with like very high capacity. And so the problem is if you actually look, the signal only triggers to tell you to short. There's not like a reverse effect. I guess like maybe there would be, but we don't run our strategies. Or like we tune the strategies to not lose money. So it's like you make money, all right, short. And what do you short, right? Like you short like the futures. But if you actually look into doing it, so there's this one effect, which is like funding rates. When this happens, a lot of sophisticated people are shorting. And I don't think everyone is using the same signal, but this is just in general, alpha is super correlated with other alpha. Like people can be looking at like totally different things, but at the end of the day, alpha is like super correlated. And so I think people are smart and they're making the right trades. So there's the funding rate. And then there's this like other thing where like the symbols that perform like absolutely best on like outliers, like extreme success. We obviously look at those as in any study. And these were the things that are very hard to short. The net effect is still interesting because like we accumulate inventory when we're trading and you can bias the inventory. You can sort of like internalize between your strategies. Different firms think about this differently, but there's obviously something you can do. Even if you didn't do that, you could just bias your strategies when this is like absolutely strongest to like bias to not holding inventory. And like
now, Jeff's ultimate mission is to create an AWS for liquidity, which I think is an amazing slogan, at least for your mission. And to be transparent, I do hold a mid 5-figure position in Hyperliquid. It wasn't an investment, it's simply a trade. So obviously I do sort of believe in the project as well, and especially sort of the thesis around it. I think even today they did around 13 billion in daily volume, which is incredibly impressive. Especially because the whole market is tanking. As I'm recording this, it's around, I think, 15% from highs on BTC. So a lot of altcoins have been dropping, severely. Like my ADA position has dropped by, I think, about 22%, give or take. So those sort of things are going to happen. And with Hyperliquid being able to hold up so strongly compared to that, it seems quite impressive. Now, by no means is this thread to be a sort of advertisement for Hyperliquid or for Jeff Yan. Personally, I do think he has a very interesting character and he seems incredibly well versed. However, I would love to see more of him on other podcasts, maybe talking about more about his market making days previously, or even the infrastructure of building Hyperliquid. Now, he did actually go quite deep when he was on Flirting with Models, which if you don't watch any quantitative podcasts, you really need to watch Flirting with Models. It's an amazing podcast. It can be quite technical or in-depth, but it's personally something I personally always watch, and it's an incredible podcast. But if you find this type of content valuable and want more every single week, feel free to follow me at GhostWorkTrades on Twitter, or feel free to subscribe, and I normally publish a new video every single week. Apart from that, have a great Christmas and a great New Year's.